A winter morning, 1889. A man steps into a narrow street in Turin. The sky is iron grey. Horses shift their weight in the cold. A carriage driver shouts, brief, sharp, a sound of distress. Then silence. The man, thin, mustached, dressed in dark wool, walks slowly toward the commotion. A horse is being beaten. He reaches it, wraps his arms around the animal's neck and breaks. Friedrich Nietzsche collapses. His body falls, but in this telling, the scene halts mid-motion, suspended. The image freezes just before impact. A breath, a whisper. What if the most dangerous skill you can ever learn is to become who you are? We are not speaking of danger in the usual sense, not bullets, not bombs, but a far more intimate threat, the peril of radical self-knowledge, the volatility of digging beneath your inherited scripts, your values, your beliefs, your identity, and asking, who wrote this story, and why have I obeyed it? Religious icons flicker, stock tickers, headlines, likes, wars waged in the name of truth, products sold in the name of self-care, sermons masked as advertising, history blurred with content, images flood past like projections on wet pavement, brief, bright, and gone. Every one of them claims to know who you are, but Nietzsche didn't just challenge ideas. He challenged the roots from which ideas derive their power. The foundations of morality, virtue, and meaning itself. This will not be a lesson, it is a descent into the mechanics of control, the psychology of obedience, and the training Nietzsche believed could make you a sovereign self. Most never attempt it. Some who do, break. But if you endure, something else may be waiting on the other side. Freedom, if you can bear its weight. Knowledge has always been more than just a collection of facts. It is a force, sometimes gentle, sometimes explosive, capable of rearranging the very architecture of the world we live in. History remembers these detonations well. Socrates, condemned to drink the hemlock, not because he armed a rebellion, but because he questioned the moral compass of Athens itself. Galileo, peering through his telescope, did not merely see moons orbiting Jupiter. He saw the fragile scaffolding of human certainty begin to tremble. And in dusty workshops and dimly lit taverns, pamphlets whispered into the hands of strangers have kindled revolutions that toppled kings. But these are visible acts of disruption. They take what a society believes to be stable and fracture it. Yet there is another kind of disruption, quieter but infinitely more dangerous. This is the disruption Nietzsche brings. He does not simply add new data to the ledger of human knowledge. He does not try to correct the record or supply better statistics. Instead, he asks why we keep such a ledger at all, why we measure truth. In this way, why we cling to these moral hierarchies, why we obey the very rules that shackle us. Safe knowledge is the kind that upgrades the system without threatening its legitimacy. A new technology, a refined theory, a better method of farming. Dangerous knowledge is the kind that asks whether the system should exist at all. Safe knowledge lets a society grow stronger. Dangerous knowledge forces it to question whether strength is even the right goal. And here lies the unsettling truth. Every society, without exception, labels dangerous knowledge as madness, heresy, or immorality. It packages conformity as virtue, obedience as morality, and unquestioning belief as the highest good. Nietzsche points directly at the heart of this packaging. He unmasks the moralities that sanctify pity, obedience, and herd safety, not as eternal truths, but as historical strategies of control. This is not a political pamphlet urging you to join a cause. It is a solvent poured over the very concept of causes. It doesn't tell you which party deserves your vote. It teaches you how parties are manufactured, how leaders are chosen, and how beliefs are sculpted to fit the needs of power. It doesn't give you a new doctrine to live by. It removes the need for doctrine entirely. Once you absorb this kind of knowledge, you cannot return to the same unexamined faith you had before. It doesn't just unmask governments, religions, and traditions. It unearths the quiet ways in which you have lied to yourself, dressed your fears in the costume of morality, and called it your identity. If this is true, then much of what you call yourself may be nothing more than a historical disguise, stitched together by centuries of inherited obedience, worn so long that you've forgotten it was ever put on. Nietzsche did not see evil as the root flaw in humanity. What he saw was subtler and far more enduring. It was a psychological economy that trades in safety, sameness, and the quiet thrill of moralizing against those who stand apart. The most unsettling part is that this economy feels righteous to those who live within it. Here emerges one of Nietzsche's most piercing concepts: resentiment. Resentiment is the alchemy by which weakness transforms itself into a claim of moral superiority. The timid and powerless, unable to act directly, reshape the moral map itself. The qualities once praised in the strong, ambition, assertiveness, vitality, are recoded as vices, arrogance, selfishness, vanity. Meanwhile, compliance, passivity, and obedience are elevated to the highest virtues. This inversion is what Nietzsche calls the slave revolt in morals. It is not a conspiracy, but a deep cultural shift, an internal rewiring of what counts as good. In psychological terms, it is the logic of status anxiety, where success breeds suspicion, the mechanism of scapegoating, where grievances seek a target, the habit of cloaking revenge in the language of justice, the use of identity itself as a weapon of moral leverage. The herd does not only police your actions, it polices your perception. It tells you which desires are selfish, which forms of strength are toxic, which ambitions you must never admit to having. Picture a classroom where a sharp idea dies unspoken because it might offend the consensus. A workplace where competence is branded aggression. A public square where nuance drowns beneath the roar of outrage. The dangerous skill begins here, learning to see the moral language around you as a mask for deeper drives. Once you notice it, you are no longer safely inside the story society is telling. You stand outside it looking in, and the question becomes, will you step back into the herd or stay where the view is clearer but colder? Nietzsche's genealogy is not a polite history lesson. It is a scalpel, sharp enough to peel away centuries of sanctity from the values we hold most dear. His method begins with a simple, unsettling question. Who profits from this ideal? Which instincts does it bless and which does it suppress? When this blade is applied, familiar virtues begin to look strangely mortal. Take guilt. We imagine it as a universal moral instinct, but Nietzsche traces its roots to something far more transactional, the ancient debtor-creditor relationship. To owe was to be at the mercy of another's power. When open cruelty, beatings, mutilations, was no longer socially tolerable, punishment turned inward. The body could no longer be whipped, so the mind whipped itself. Thus, bad conscience was born. Cruelty internalized, self-directed, moralized, or consider the sanctification of selflessness. In times when strength was politically inconvenient, when the ambitious threatened to disrupt the order, priestly powers recoded vigor as sin and weakness as holiness. To renounce one's will was to be good. To assert it was to be evil. The genealogist's work is not cynicism, it is clarity. By tracing a value to its origin, you strip away its mystical glow and see the human fingerprints, the political needs, the strategic manipulations that built it. Then comes the truly disquieting turn, the realization that your own private commandments, your I musts, your I shoulds, your I can't, might be nothing more than inherited constraints or clever self-protections. This method is not confined to philosophy. It is alive in modern propaganda, in advertising seductive origin stories, in the branding that tells you not only what to buy, but who you are when you buy it. The genealogist's knife cuts both ways. It can liberate you from illusions, but it can also leave you bleeding, stripped of the very values that once gave your life shape. And here lies the next challenge. If demolition is the first act, creation must be the second. Otherwise, the ruins will belong to nihilism. The most dangerous skill Nietzsche points to can be named without poetry: the disciplined ability to dissolve the values you have inherited and then create your own. This is self-overcoming. It is not rebellion for rebellion's sake. It is not adolescent contrarianism. It is the deliberate act of becoming the sovereign author of your life's standards. When Nietzsche commands, "Become who you are," he is not urging you to simply express whatever you happen to feel. He is calling for self-construction, a deliberate forging of the self as one might forge steel. The sovereign individual is rare, a person who can promise, whose instincts are not at war but arranged into a chosen hierarchy, who legislates from within rather than submitting to the laws of the herd. This is not license for cruelty or selfish indulgence. The measure of the values you create is life affirmation. Do they increase your strength, deepen your character, and expand your capacity for generosity? The metaphor is artistic. Your values are your aesthetic legislation. Your character is your composition. Morality becomes a craft, and you the craftsman. But there is danger in this freedom. Once you accept authorship, you can no longer outsource blame. You lose the comforting shelter of culture, parents, politics, or God. You alone decide what your pain means, what your effort serves, what your failures teach. This responsibility is a weight most will not carry. That is why the skill is rare. And yet it is a skill, one that can be trained, through solitude that clarifies the mind, through ruthless honesty that strips away pretenses, through the shaping of taste, the discipline of active forgetting, the embrace of amor fati, the test, serve eternal recurrence. The cost is high, but so is the reward, the chance to live as the author, not the echo of your life. Nietzsche's solitude is not the loneliness of abandonment. It is an acoustic clarity, a clearing where the noise of the herd finally fades, and you can hear the faint, unsteady rhythm of your own voice. In this silence, there is no applause to guide you, no outrage to provoke you, no crowd to mirror you back to yourself. Only the workshop remains, the quiet room, the long walk, the discomfort of meeting yourself without distraction. Here awakens what Nietzsche calls the intellectual conscience, the stubborn refusal to believe what you do not truly know, the vow to resist even your most comforting lies. It is the discipline of asking again and again, is this mine, or did I inherit it without thought? Suffering enters not as a fetish for pain, but as tuition, an unavoidable fee for real growth. What does not kill me makes me stronger is no motivational slogan here. It is a pact with hardship as the sculptor of self. Every loss, humiliation, and failure becomes a chisel stroke, carving away the parts of you that were never truly yours. The training is unglamorous. Pages of journals filled and burned, habits adopted, broken, and rebuilt. Quiet refusals of validation, turning away from the easy praise that keeps you tame. Saying no where you once said yes. Experiments in living without the constant mirror of other people's approval. And then comes the most perilous stretch, the interim void. You have shattered the old tables of values, but no new ones stand in their place. This is Nietzsche's desert in Zarathustra, the empty, exposed place, where the temptation to go back is strongest. Most turn around. The conscience whispers, go on, and only a few obey. 4 instruments stand at the center of Nietzsche's training ground, each a discipline, not a shortcut. Amor fati, the love of fate. This is not passive resignation, but radical endorsement. The act of saying yes to your life, exactly as it is and as it will be. It is the alchemy that turns resentment into fuel. Instead of asking, why me, you say, for this I was made. A professional facing a career collapse who embraces amor fati sees not ruin, but the raw material for reinvention. Eternal recurrence. The demon's question. Would you live this exact life again forever without a single detail altered? This is not a prediction, but a filter. If the thought makes you recoil, change the pattern. If it fills you with resolve, commit more deeply. Someone trapped in an empty routine can use this as a scalpel. If living it eternally is intolerable, why live it even once? Active forgetting, not. Erasing memory, but choosing not to feed it. The refusal to carry sterile grievances or chew endlessly on what cannot be changed. It is hygiene for the mind, clearing space for creation and joy. The one betrayed who practices active forgetting is not naive. They simply decline to let the betrayal dictate their future shape. Giving style to one's character. The aesthetic act of curating impulses into a coherent form. Taste becomes moral architecture. You elevate what serves you, exclude what corrodes you. The artist paralyzed by perfectionism uses this to turn chaos into composition, allowing their work to carry their signature rather than their self-doubt. These tools are not life hacks. They are slow disciplines. Used over time, they reforge identity into something deliberate, something you would not only endure forever, but choose again without hesitation. If the skill of self-overcoming is so powerful, why doesn't everyone seize it? Because the abyss is real and it has teeth. The first risk is psychological. Solitude can harden into loneliness. The joy of self-authorship can tilt into vertigo when there is no inherited map to follow. Some, staring too long at the ruins of old values, slide into nihilism. Nothing matters, so why build at all? The second risk is social. To dissolve the moral consensus is to invite misunderstanding. You may be accused of arrogance, of cruelty, of elitism. Some circles will quietly exile you. Others will openly reject you. The third risk is ethical. Strength can be misread as a license for domination. Self-overcoming can be twisted into the domination of others rather than of the self. Nietzsche himself warns, "When you gaze long into an abyss, the abyss also gazes into you." Here the tone must sharpen. The yes-sayer to life creates out of abundance. The fanatic imposes from fear. The cynic destroys because he cannot build. Without vigilance, the line between them can blur. The collapse Nietzsche suffered in Turin is not to be romanticized. It is not a cautionary fable in neat moral terms, but it is a reminder. Wrestling with reality at full intensity carries real cost. Minds can break under the strain. Safeguards exist. Friendship with other strong minds who challenge without diminishing. Regular regrounding in art and nature, honest feedback loops that prevent you from drifting into self-congratulating delusion. Freedom is expensive. It will cost you comfort, belonging, and the right to say, "I had no choice." The question is not whether it's worth the price. The question is whether you can afford to pay it. History's most catastrophic misreading of Nietzsche began after his death, in the hands of someone who should have been his guardian, his sister, Elisabeth Förster Nietzsche. With fervent nationalist and anti-Semitic sympathies, she curated, altered and outright distorted his writings, reshaping them into a weapon for an ideology he would have loathed. She lifted fragments from their context, stripped them of nuance, and polished them into slogans palatable to the rising tide of German nationalism. Nietzsche's contempt for herd nationalism, buried. His rejection of anti-Semitism, excised. His celebration of individual creators over the machinery of the state, erased. The result was a grotesque inversion. A philosopher of inner sovereignty, turned into a prophet for external domination. The Nazi regime seized this forged Nietzsche, hammering subtle psychological insight into blunt propaganda. Here lies one of the great perils of dangerous ideas. They can be stolen, stripped of their inner discipline, and wielded to flatter the instincts they were meant to challenge. And the distortion didn't end in the 20th century. Today we see softer misappropriations, corporate will to power reframed as hustle culture's mantra, influencers converting the arduous path of self-overcoming into a glossy brand identity. The words remain, but their spine is gone. The lesson is twofold. First, if you do not conduct your own genealogy of quotes and doctrines, someone will sell you an edited Nietzsche that flatters your worst impulses. Second, the skill of value creation must stay anchored to life affirmation, to the cultivation of higher types within yourself, not as a license for cruelty, political or personal. Without taste, restraint and depth, even the noblest concepts rot. What begins as philosophy can decay into spectacle or harden into tyranny.